Okay, today we are going to be starting off on our origins of government. This is our first video for American government. These are the same PowerPoints we were going over in class. These are meant to be a companion to the conversations and discussions that we have in class. This is going to hopefully cut through it as quickly as possible. Versus, of course, in class we have a little bit longer and deeper conversations. This is meant to kind of get the main points and kind of talk through it, hopefully in an interactive way that is helpful and is a good supplement to class. So let's just dive right in. Origins of government, put it onto another line. Great organization that I got on these slides. All right, so first of all, on an American government class, we need to just, at the very beginning, we're talking more kind of theory, and we're going to back up and really just talk about theories of government before we dive into the specifics of our government. All right. So first of all, what is a government? All right. And so what we need to get out of this is just short, simple, to the point. It's an institution that makes and enforces public policies. All right. Now, how we pick public policies and how we enforce that, that's going to change a lot. But I think that your general idea of a government, all right, for example, the United States government is going to pretty much be in line with the way that we're going to use that in this class. But just keep in mind that the government, think about all different forms of government throughout history. You have kings, right? You have a situation maybe where it's a tribe, right? And there's a tribal council. You have a situation like a dictator or a king. All sorts of these things, or even today, you have something like Russia and Vladimir Putin, where he really controls a lot of the government. But there's also, government agencies, and it's complicated, and it's a big state with millions and millions of people. So there's a lot of forms, all right, a lot of different ways to kind of have a government, all right. Public policies are whatever the government decides to do. I think public policy is a little bit of a tricky term here because, again, it could be what the public wants, but it, maybe not. The government is not always representative of what the public desires. All right, maybe governmental policy would be like a tighter term on that. So what we want to really understand is that there are three kinds of kind of functions of government, three powers, all right? Legislative, executive, and judicial, all right? And so we have three separate branches for that, right? And that is going to be important in this class. So if that is new to you, that would be something to kind of write down and think about. Legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch in American government. We can also think about those in terms of powers, right? And that can be in one person, or that can be in different branches, or it can be split amongst multiple people. So we have the idea of making a law, all right? Deciding what the rules are, all right? That is a legislative power. Then we have the power, and so we can think in our country like Congress, all right? Then we have the power to enforce those laws. Think like the police. The police go out, they have the Ohio Revised Code, they decide, they are tasked with making sure that people follow it. And then we have the judicial branch, and the judicial power, all right, in terms of judges to interpret the laws. You go to court, and and a judge, or in some cases a jury, decides whether or not you have broken a law. You also have situations where if a law is ambiguous, somebody has, and people disagree about what the meaning of a law is, right? What does it mean under the Fourth Amendment to have freedom of speech? It's a pretty vague concept, right? And so we have to kind of get into that. Who's going to decide that? The judiciary decides that. Now, in our government, and that's divided into three separate branches, and it's divided in federalism, that we'll talk about later, into state and local, state and federal. But we can imagine for a king, right, who makes the law? Well, the king decides what the law is. Who enforces the law? Well, the king enforces the law. All right, well, who decides if someone broke the law? Well, it's the king too. So we can imagine all sorts of situations, right, where we can divide these amongst multiple people, or we can keep it with the same person, or there's all sorts of ways to divide it. So this slide is really, all we really need out of this slide at this point is to understand that there are many different ways to divide the power, right? The ultimate responsibility for the exercise of these powers may be held by a single person, as I was saying, or by a small group, or if it's with a lot of people, it can be called a democracy. These are all different. So anarchy is basically saying, look, there is no government. There's no form of government. And we talked about in class that that you're free to do whatever you want. Cool. But then also, like, how anyone that's stronger than you can just take your stuff, right? We talked about you're free to hit somebody in the head with a baseball bat, but you also have no freedom or protection from someone hitting you with a baseball bat. So it's interesting to think about, well, does that make you any more free, or are you actually less free? All right? In a monarchy and a dictatorship, like we just kind of talked about, they have all of the powers, the legislative power, the judicial power, and the executive power. They enforce the laws, they write the laws, they decide if you broke the laws. Now, with an oligarchy, and we'll talk about juntas later, but with an oligarchy, what that's saying is it rests with a few people, all right, that multiple people. It's similar to a monarchy, but there's an elite ruling class that has the power to do those things. People talk a lot about the Russian oligarchs, all right? They're very rich Russians who really kind of pull the levers of power in Russia. There are other forms of it, but that's just one that's kind of in the news. You might have seen, I think that the former owner of I think one of the, maybe Man City or Manchester United, was considered to be a Russian oligarch. All right, and then finally, we have democracy, and there's just two things that we got to get out of this, right? Direct democracy and representative democracy. Direct democracy means that every person actually votes on everything, which is great in principle. But then think about, so yes, and one good way, the example that people always talk about is ancient Greece. And so ancient Greece, they would actually call in, again, it's funny when we say all, because in ancient Greece it was only a certain segment of people. It was men. I don't actually know. It was men, and I think you had to serve in the military, but it was a very, we say all, but it was still very much restricted to a certain group of people, and throughout history it has been. But the idea is that every person, all right, gets to vote up or down on every policy, all right? And one good example that you might think of is if you've ever seen people walking down the street asking, can you sign this petition? Can you sign this petition? And then if it gets on the ballot, and everybody in Ohio then votes on, for example, recently there was legalization of marijuana, up or down. And so we decide as a state, or medicinal marijuana. I believe that was a ballot issue and passed, and then we just vote, and everybody votes. Everyone is able to vote, and then what ends up happening is if more people want it, then that's the policy. If less people want it, then that's not the policy. In a representative democracy, we go and we vote for a person to vote for us. So you go, and these are all the ads that you see right now. It's 2022 if you're watching this in the future. Right now, J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan are running for Senate in Ohio. And we don't vote for every policy in the Senate. We vote for either J.D. Vance or we vote for Tim Ryan, and they say that they give us a feeling for how they're going to vote and how they stand on certain issues. But at the end of the day, they vote for us. Now, there are pros and cons to that, obviously, but it can think about how much your average person is really familiar with a lot of these kind of dense issues, and whether or not everybody has time to make an intelligent, informed vote on, say, the Environmental Protection Act and all of the intricacies of it. I mean, sure, it's great to have everyone vote, but then at the same time, I have a job. I've got to make these videos for you guys, so I don't really have time, so I can maybe trust Tim or JD to take care of that for me.